Вітаю, друзі! Обговоримо.
Greetings, friends. Let's discuss the latest news from Russian propagandists and fake generators who are trying to create the necessary media image to justify the defeat of the Russian army in the Kherson direction. And in order to downplay their own losses, they traditionally resort to rhetoric that they are losing not to the Ukrainian armed forces, but to NATO forces, telling a lot of absolutely ridiculous stories about mercenaries from NATO countries who advance in the Kherson direction and destroy the army of the aggressor from there. In particular, one of the Gauleiters in the Zaporizhia direction, a certain Rogov, continues to poison the media space with statements that, allegedly, thousands of mercenaries from NATO countries are attacking the Russian armed forces. "I said a lot back in September, after the Kharkiv disaster," says Gauleiter. "But now I have to repeat it again. We are at war with NATO, and the armed forces of Ukraine are just a tool." The lie is that the Russian army is collapsing under the pressure of the armed forces of Ukraine, and NATO is not taking any part in this conflict. Also, the voices of propagandists demanding the massacre of those Russians who do not sympathize with the aggressor began to be heard in the Russian media space. Another Telegram channel, Ramzai, reports, "The autumn campaign is lost. Huge territory is lost. Russian Kherson is surrendered to the enemy." Where and when Kherson became Russian is unclear. And in these near-catastrophic conditions, we see complete relaxation in the air. Deserters are still running to the rear. Defectors are feasting in Tbilisi and Yerevan. The scumbags are preparing bombs for the military commissariats. And so on and so on. It will end with a call to start punishing those Russians who do not want to participate in aggression against Ukraine. Similarly, Russian propagandists began to look for extremes in the fact that they are losing armored vehicles, retreating from the Kherson direction. The video is not the first and clearly not the last regarding the question about the abandoned equipment during the retreat. At the same time, they show how the Ukrainian armed forces pull the trophy tank T-90 of the Russian army. Speaking of the scale of the loss of equipment during the retreat, it will be possible to calculate it after its completion. The retreating group has more than 10,000 personnel, and abandoned vehicles will be inevitable. In this way, the Russians signed off on the fact that their wanted retreat ended with the loss of not only personnel, but also will provide trophy equipment that will be used by the armed forces of Ukraine. Meanwhile, you can't envy Russian propagandists, because any of their words can in one way or another violate the Russian criminal code. If they support the surrender of Kherson, then they are subject to the effect of Article 280, paragraph 1. Public calls for the implementation of actions aimed at violating the territorial integrity of Russia, because they assigned Kherson to Russia. If they condemn the loss of Kherson, then it is again Article 280, paragraph 3 of the Criminal Code of Russia. Public actions aimed at discrediting the use of the Russian armed forces in order to protect the interests of Russia and its citizens, and so on and so on. They start telling fable stories that this retreat is temporary and they will definitely return. In particular, "On the topic of the right bank, we will definitely return there. These territories are not surrendered. We simply left them to regroup, gather strengths, and return with greater forces." Serhiy Morozov, assistant to the Gauleiter of the Kherson region, is lying about this on the air at Solovyo. Of course, the escape under pressure of the Ukrainian armed forces from the Kherson direction is a direct result of active offensive actions in the direction by the Ukrainian armed forces, and there will be no return of the Russians to the right bank of the Dnipro River. And the crisis of the genre among Russian propagandists is really deep, because they are completely serious about refuting internet memes. In particular, after the Ukrainian armed forces came close to Kherson, pictures began to circulate on the internet that Russian President Vladimir Putin allegedly signed a decree on the exclusion of Kherson from the Russian Federation. Well, it's clear that it is a joke. No one recognizes the annexation of this city. But in Russia, they created a pseudo-website to expose memes. And they write that Putin did not sign such a decree on the exclusion of Kherson from Russia. Of course, he did not sign it, because all his decrees are worthless. Kherson was, is, and will be Ukraine. And the propagandists lie about the illegit transition of the Russian army to the village of Pavlivka near Vuhledar. I contacted the commanders of the 72nd Brigade, which defends Ukrainian territories in this direction. They confirmed that Vuhledar, as well as Pavlivka, remain under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. The enemy may indeed have raised the Russian flag somewhere on the outskirts of the village of Pavlivka, but it has nothing to do with control over the settlement. And the Ukrainian armed forces continue to resist the occupiers. Russian propagandists are also outraged by the fact that, in particular, during the offensive on Pavlivka and Vuhledar, the aggressors' armed forces do not receive sufficient support from neighboring units. Thus, Vladlen Tatarsky, another Russian military propagandist, is outraged by the fact that during the offensive on Pavlivka, where our defense lines are held by the 72nd Brigade of Black Zaporizhia. So, we often have to watch such a picture. There is a battle going on for a stronghold, and there is silence and calmness in the position nearby. Due to such things, it is not difficult for the enemy to understand what our plan is and concentrate all firepower on repelling our attack. The propagandist Tatarsky is angry. This once again confirms that Russia's plans to seize the territory of the Donetsk region by some symbolic date are a total failure, and Donbass is, will be, and remains Ukraine. And finally, a separate post by the Russian military propagandist Kots, who takes pleasure in the fact that the underground was turned off in Kharkiv, deserves attention. This happened a few days ago. The Kharkiv underground was turned off. It is clear that this is temporary, but still, this is the result of our impact on the energy system of the Kiev regime. What is Kots comforted by? By the fact that the civilian population is suffering, and this is confirmation that Russia is carrying out terrorism on the territory of Ukraine, intimidating the civilian population, and this also confirms that their strikes on the power system are not aimed at limiting the offensive actions of the armed forces of Ukraine, but specifically for that ordinary citizens of Ukraine, including Russian-speaking, including those who live in Kharkiv, suffer. And this once again confirms that the whole ideology of this Russian war against Ukraine, to liberate the Russian-speaking population, is just another fake. At this point, I conclude the briefing with a traditional appeal not to believe Russian liars, to trust the armed forces of Ukraine, the national telethon, the military and political leadership of Ukraine. See you.